I had prepared an introduction for the Secretary, and I will use that in due course. But in the first instance, let me congratulate both the White House and our own counsel and all of those who have been involved in the organization of this conference. I think it's been an excellent idea. I think we've had a wonderful day. And starting with the note that was struck this morning about the importance of the hemisphere to the United States, it always sort of amazes me that we even have to remind ourselves of this fact. But as someone who spent about half of a 37-year Foreign Service career serving in Latin America, it's always been quite evident to me, and I think that the importance of the hemisphere is only growing in its importance to us. If I look back when I first served in the hemisphere, which was back in the 1970s, 1973, I went to Quito, Ecuador. I'm delighted that the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of Ecuador is here with us today. Many of the countries in the hemisphere were Are you here with the message?
This is always awkward.
Okay. No, it's fine. I think I can talk for 10 minutes, Dan. When I arrived in Ecuador in 1973, the country was... So I've got about 40 years to go here. The country was ruled by a military dictatorship. And if you looked at the entire hemisphere, that was fairly characteristic of what you saw throughout, particularly the continent of South America and in Central America as well. So I think while we sometimes feel a bit frustrated about the problems associated with nation building, with political development in specific individual countries, if you just step back for a moment and look back at some of the trends that have occurred, lo and behold, 25, 30 years later, you see democracy flourishing in our part of the world, and dictatorship and authoritarianism are really the complete exception and not the rule. Witness the conference that the President is about to go to, which is being attended exclusively by democracies. We would have had a very small conference of leaders of this hemisphere indeed if we tried to organize a conference exclusively consisting of democracies when I entered the Foreign Service in 1960. So it has been tremendous progress. I think the next step, and now we're really seeing this happening in a big way in these recent years, has been the interconnection and the integration of the hemisphere with the global economy. I personally was able to witness this in the country of Mexico when Mexico joined the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade in the mid-'80s, and then embarked upon the NAFTA negotiations with the United States in the early 1990s. And I think as a consequence of the NAFTA, we've seen a real game-changing development in North America, with levels of trade tripling or quadrupling in these past 20 years, and the integration of our manufacturing and processes has achieved an extremely high level of success. Canada even benefited enormously from the three-way North American Free Trade Agreement, because I think before we had that negotiation, there wasn't that much interest in Mexico on the part of the Canadians. And so NAFTA ended up being sort of like an entry ticket to the Canadians for becoming more knowledgeable and familiar with Mexico, and I think very much to their benefit. Now, we did have 9/11 and the preoccupation with security that occurred during the ensuing years between 2001, 2010, and I think there was at that time more focus on security of the border as opposed to the competitiveness of North America. But I think things have moved back into some kind of equilibrium with regard to both of those objectives. So as much as we're committed, and Roberta Jacobson was just talking about it, to dealing with the issues surrounding security in our hemisphere and on our border, I think there's also a lot more focus now on trying to make our border smarter and more competitive so that we can really take advantage of that large global market that is out there. And I take great encouragement from the fact that, for example, there are companies that had moved their manufacturing operations from Mexico to China in recent years, and we now see a trend of those companies starting to come back to Mexico because they consider the economy there now to be much more competitive. So things have been very positive in that area. I think another new and important trend compared to when I started my Foreign Service career is there's a lot more attention being paid by the United States of America to what's happening in South America. Brazil, Chile, Argentina, for us, were very remote concepts a number of decades ago. And I think one of the major developments has been the tremendous strides that have been taken in deepening and strengthening our relationship with the country of Brazil. And we were talking earlier, mention was made of Dilma Rousseff's visit here and her meeting with President Obama. Chile is a great success story. It's managed that transition from dictatorship to democracy and has a free trade agreement with the United States. The fact that we got finally the free trade agreement with Colombia was a major development, and I really have got to credit the administration, Ron Kirk and the others who were at the table earlier this morning for the efforts, the successful efforts that they made to obtain the ratification, the approval by our Congress of those remaining pending FTAs, Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. And in fact, I wonder how easy it would be to stand up here and talk about a policy towards this hemisphere if we had not gotten those agreements ratified. So I think that was a very, very positive development. And then Mr. Pasquale in our breakout session pointed out something that was very interesting, and he said it again, the extraordinary contribution that this hemisphere makes to our energy security, the fact that 50% of our oil imports come from this hemisphere. And I think that there are probably opportunities in the future to even increase that percentage, particularly if a country like Brazil really comes on stream with, I think, Carlos, you were saying 4 to 6 million barrels a day at some time in the future. Now, I know this is a Latino community, and we're concerned about what happens south of our border and the large and important Hispanic community here in the United States. But I'd like to also put in a modest plug for our relationship with Canada. It's a part of the hemisphere. We now treat it in the State Department as if it were part of the hemisphere. When I joined the Foreign Service, Canada was in the Bureau of European Affairs, go figure. But I think we really got to say we have no stronger ally than the country of Canada. Going back for decades, we cooperate with that country on every manner of subject, whether it's economic, political, security. They're members of NATO. We have, as has been pointed out frequently, and I think sometimes conflated, I think we talked about trade with Latin America when I think figures from Canada were being included this morning in some of the spectacular figures that were cited. We have, Canada is our largest trading partner. And I think we have no better friend than Canada. They fought side by side with us in a couple of world wars. They've been fighting alongside us in in Afghanistan. And I don't think we have any more reliable friend. And I think they also share, and I think this is very important, the United States' commitment to this hemisphere, to the well-being and prosperity of Latin America and the Caribbean. Canada has had a long record of assisting the Caribbean countries throughout its history and has strong affinities there. Dan, I've about exhausted my repertoire. I don't know where you are, but I think perhaps I'd take some questions from anybody in the audience if anybody would. Yes, sir.
Can you comment on the penetration of Iran in Latin America?
Okay, here we go. Good. Thank you for the one question that I'm going to answer this afternoon. The penetration of Iran in the Western Hemisphere. When I was Director of National Intelligence, I paid a certain amount of attention to this. I think maybe Hezbollah in particular, which is a political group supported by the Iranians, has used access that it has in this hemisphere, perhaps through some of the Lebanese American communities and so forth, to raise money. I've never been particularly concerned about any kind of military or terrorist threat, although you do have to wonder what, one flight a day from Tehran to Caracas is doing and what it's accomplishing. But again, I've seen it as more of a fundraising kind of thing and something that I have not given too much concern to. I think I better go greet the secretary, and I'll be right back. I'll be back to do what I thought I was going to do this afternoon. Since taking office as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton has made 30 visits to 18 countries in the Western Hemisphere. I hope I have that number right. A testament to how hard she has worked to enhance our engagement with a region so vital to United States interests. She has strengthened regional cooperation on all the summit issue areas listed on our agenda today, from multilateral partnerships on citizen security to high-level dialogues on economics and energy. On the promotion of hemispheric trade, Secretary Clinton deserves much credit for helping forge broad bipartisan support in Congress for the free trade agreements with Colombia and Panama. Following implementation of those two pacts, the United States will be able to boast an unbroken chain of economic integration that literally connects the Americas from Canada to Chile. I would also like to thank Secretary Clinton for her participation during the last 3 years at the annual Washington Conference on the Americas, which the Council of the Americas co-hosts with the State Department Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. Madam Secretary, this year's conference will take place on May 8th, and we are hopeful that you will be in town that day, thereby permitting you to address our conference once again. As former Deputy Secretary of State, I know it's only an elevator ride down from my old office down to the conference site. There will be certainly much to discuss from this week's visit to Washington by Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff to this week's Summit of the Americas in Cartagena. Following the summit, Secretary Clinton will travel to Brazil to follow up on these important conversations. As she remarked at our conference last May, there is power in our proximity, not only our geographic proximity to our friends in the hemisphere, but also the proximity of our economic interests, our values, our culture, and the challenges that we share. I look forward to hearing the Secretary's vision for building on these connections. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. I am delighted to have a chance to address you today. I know you've had a busy and active set of encounters and discussions, but it is a special treat for me to be here. I thank you, John, for that introduction, because you and many in this audience have held fast to a vision of partnership in the Americas, even when some people may have had a hard time seeing it or understanding it, because it is so important that we keep our eyes on the horizon about what is possible and continue to work toward achieving it. It was that potential which inspired 18 years ago, the very first Summit of the Americas. I remember it very well when my husband announced in this building somewhere, but not in this brand new conference center, that the United States would host the first ever gathering of democratically elected leaders from throughout the Western Hemisphere. He talked then about our unique opportunity to build a community of free nations, diverse in culture and history, but bound together by a commitment to responsive and free government, vibrant civil societies, open economies, and rising living standards for all of our people. Well, that opportunity that was spoken about 18 years ago has really been born into reality. The people and the societies of the Americas have done so much to realize it. And that may be exemplified by the place where President Obama and I will head tomorrow for the 6th Summit of the Americas. I think that if we look back on the work we have done through the last years to support Colombia, it's quite remarkable where Colombia stands today. Now, first and foremost, of course, the credit goes to the heroic effort of Colombia's people and government, but it's had steadfast U.S. support. And so leaders from the entire hemisphere will gather in Cartagena with an agenda focused not on how we overcome a threat, but how we seize a unique opportunity. As much as our hemisphere has changed, it is not alone in that experience. The world has changed so much, and we have to do a very honest assessment about where the United States stands in our efforts to realize the potential of these partnerships. Before President Obama traveled to Brazil, Chile, and El Salvador last year, I did address the issue of what I call the power of proximity, because the Americas drive our prosperity. They buy more than 40% of our exports, 3 times as much as China. They provide more than half of our imported energy. They are home to a growing number of global players with a central role in building new architectures of cooperation that defend our interests and our values. Their record of democratic development has global resonance at a time when democratic models and partners are needed more than ever. And our historic and deepening interdependence gives the Americas a singular importance to our people, our culture, and our society. So harnessing that power of proximity is one of the most strategically significant tasks facing our foreign policy in the years ahead. I think the same can be true for our neighbors, because the power of proximity runs in both directions, and we together must harness it. We must turn the Americas, already a community of shared history, geography, culture, and values, into something greater, a shared platform for global success. That has been the principle behind the Obama administration's focus on building equal partnerships, and it will be the message that the President takes to the summit. We will look to translate our strategic vision into concrete steps. As our Colombian hosts have shown, those steps must be all about building connections among our governments, our businesses, our markets, our educational institutions, our societies, and citizens. Now, when we think about connecting the Americas, we start with our shared agenda for competitiveness and innovation. After all, this hemisphere is home not just to the United States' biggest trading partners, but also to the dynamic emerging economies. Brazil and Mexico are projected to become top 5 global economies in coming decades. Countries like Colombia, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, Panama have found recipes for strong growth. That has major implications for jobs right here. U.S. exports in this hemisphere were up 24% last year. President Obama set a goal of doubling exports in 5 years, and we are well on the way to doing that. But what it means for Latin America and the new middle class is that half of all households are now in the middle class. That number could grow to 3/4 within 20 years. Our free trade agreements and economic diplomacy capitalize on this two-way market. Thanks to the FTAs we ratified last year with Colombia and Panama, as John said, our trade partnerships run uninterrupted from the Arctic to Patagonia. We have signed a slew of agreements on economic cooperation and investment with Brazil and others. The Trans-Pacific Partnership that we are negotiating includes Chile and Peru. It's also received strong interest from Canada and Mexico. What's notable is not just the scale, but the makeup of hemispheric trade. It consists of value-added products that create jobs and drive innovation. Production and design span borders, like the Lear jet, which a Canadian company builds in the United States with Mexican manufactured parts. This is high-quality trade, and high-quality trade means competitiveness for all of our companies. Now, that's good, but it's not good enough. For when we compare ourselves to the most dynamic global regions, we still have a ways to go. The Inter-American Development Bank estimates that hemispheric trade is only half of what it could and should be. There are still too many barriers, whether uncoordinated regulations or inadequate infrastructure, that limit our potential. And in the face of rising competition, especially from Asia, we have to up our game. That should begin with building new, more productive ties among entrepreneurs, companies, and markets. In Cartagena, we're joining with business leaders to create a sustained private sector effort that will coordinate with and complement the work of governments. We're intensifying our focus on small and medium-sized enterprises, especially those started and run by women. They account, after all, for 90% of Latin American businesses and 2/3 of Latin American jobs, yet they have little access to the tools, financing, and partnerships that could help them thrive. In the United States, just 1% of small and medium-sized enterprises access global markets. So by building links among these businesses, we can turn them into engines of job growth and prosperity. We also have to do better when it comes to the technology that makes connectivity possible. This hemisphere's young people have embraced technology and new media in huge numbers, but their ambitions have not been matched by the infrastructure and access that can drive real progress. Broadband costs more than 3 times more in Latin America than the OECD average. That's a serious drag on development. So we're going to try to leverage technology to enhance opportunity. And as you look at innovation, we need to consider it in the long term, and that means the hemisphere has to do more to provide better financing, deeper ties between scientists and institutions. We require more private initiatives, like the announcements from Boeing and GE that they will establish research and technology centers in Brazil. We have to empower all of our citizens to take advantage of the new economy. That brings me to the second area where we need to connect more: education. America's record in education is really commendable, but our record in exchanges in education throughout the hemisphere leaves a lot to be desired. We need to leverage the skills of young people. Building those connections will be key to that. When President Rousseff met with President Obama earlier this week, they advanced our joint commitment to educational exchanges under our 100,000 Strong in the Americas and Brazil's Science Without Borders. These are initiatives that will send thousands of students to train in universities in one another's countries throughout the hemisphere. Now, businesses have to do their part because they have to help us develop the skilled workforce that we seek, and we will try to build those private sector partnerships in Cartagena. We'll also build connections in a third area, energy. Now, massive oil finds are being developed in Brazil, while countries like Colombia and Canada are expanding production. And new methods have unlocked natural gas everywhere from the United States to Argentina. Smaller countries like Trinidad and Tobago are gas refiners and providers. And the progress is as striking in green energy, whether it's Mexican advances in energy efficiency, Chilean innovations in geothermal, or the work on biofuels we're doing with Brazil. We've made energy a priority of our foreign policy, and in February, I signed a historic transboundary oil agreement with Mexico. We started high-level energy dialogues with producers, and just this week, President Obama and President Rousseff agreed to collaborate on deep-water oil and gas operations. Under the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas, launched by President Obama at the Summit of the Americas in 2009, we have leveraged already more than $150 million in government investment to support more than 40 initiatives. There's no doubt the Western Hemisphere is capable of producing cleaner, cheaper, more reliable energy to support growth here and globally. But in order to do that, we have to build a truly hemispheric network of our energy sectors. Connected markets would bring economies of scale, stable supplies, efficiency, and more use of renewables. That work we will also launch in Cartagena. And we will do what we can to help create a future of sustainable, affordable energy for all in the Americas. Now, progress within the hemisphere gives the Americas a new global profile. When I talk with foreign ministers, I've just finished the G8 ministers meeting here in Washington. Whether I'm talking climate change or global growth and trade or non-proliferation, U.S.-Latin America relationships really matter to these global issues. Peru and Chile have become key partners in the Pacific. Colombia is leading on citizen security globally, and with Guatemala as one of our closest current partners on the Security Council. Uruguay contributes the most per capita to peacekeeping of any nation in the world. Costa Rica aims to become the first carbon-neutral country. Canada is one of our most important allies in diplomatic and security efforts, and nearly every country in the hemisphere stepped up to support Haiti. This global activism carries tremendous strategic benefits, and at the summit, it is time to add an outward-looking dimension to our connections because our global engagements will be crucial to our success in the hemisphere. Now, being global partners, I will hasten to say, does not mean we will always agree. That's not the case. But it reflects a faith that even when we disagree, convergent interests and values give us important shared objectives in the world. Now, President Obama and I have said many times that this will be America's Pacific century. And we are focused on the broader Pacific. But remember, the Pacific runs from the Indian Ocean to the western shores of Latin America. We see this as one large area for our strategic focus. That's why we're working with APEC. That's why we're creating the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We recognize the mutual benefits of engagement between the Americas and the rest of the Pacific. Our global partnership also extends into the G20, which includes Argentina, Brazil, Canada, and Mexico, which will host the next meeting in June. And Mexico has been a leader in the climate change negotiations from Copenhagen to Cancun to Durban. Chile has joined Mexico to become the second Latin American member of the OECD, and others are lined up to follow. When I go to Brasilia next week, my conversations there will center on the major challenges of our day, from Syria and Iran to growth and development. And I will join President Rousseff to co-chair a meeting of the Open Government Partnership, a joint effort to foster transparency and accountability among 54 governments. And a quarter of them are from Latin America and the Caribbean. So we have an affirmative agenda that is forward-thinking and outward-looking. It reflects what we can do together in this hemisphere. But at the same time, we must be clear about where we can and should do better. We cannot afford to be complacent. So we have to commit to further progress against exclusion and lack of opportunity. Yes, the region has come a long way thanks to a lot of smart social and economic policies. I applaud the work that has been done on many of the quite pioneering programs of conditional cash transfer and so much else. But the gap, the inequality gap, is still much too large. So we have to focus on economic policies that will close that gap. And we have to pay particular attention to women and indigenous and Afro-Latin communities so that they too are part of the future we envision. We have to protect democracy. It's no accident that this hemisphere's successes have come along with a nearly complete embrace of democracies. The Inter-American Democratic Charter enshrines democracy as a fundamental responsibility of governments and a right of all citizens. So we have to strengthen the capacity of the Organization of American States to defend democracy and human rights. And of course, we have to address crime and insecurity. From the start of this administration, we've made it clear that the United States accepts our share of responsibility for the criminal violence that stalks our neighbors to the south. We tripled funding for demand reduction for illegal drugs to more than $10 billion a year. We strengthened the Merida Initiative in Mexico, the Central American Citizen Security Partnership, the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, our ongoing assistance to Colombia. And our support is focused not just on helping security forces track down criminals. We're working to address the root causes of violence, from impunity to lack of opportunity, to build accountable institutions that respect human rights and enhance the rule of law, courts and prisons, police and prosecutors, schools and job training centers, and building those partnerships with political leaders, but also with businesses and with the elite who have a special obligation to help confront these challenges. I really applaud the progress that President Perez Molina has made in Guatemala in just the first few months of his tenure in tax reform. The fact that so many of the wealthy in Latin America have not paid their fair share of taxes is one of the reasons why the services that are necessary to protect citizen security, to enhance educational opportunities, have not been available. I understand the frustration in the region is high. The progress is viewed as being too slow. We have launched very open and frank dialogues with our partners to find ways that we can be of more assistance in supporting the reform efforts that are necessary. But ultimately, a lot of this comes down to the connections between people. We have to be willing to do everything we can imagine to forge those connections. We have a lot of them already: blood and family, language and culture, history and geography, but there's a lot more we can and must do. And we should act even when governments are not willing to partner with us. In Cuba, for example, the hundreds of thousands of Cuban Americans who have traveled to the island since we eased the way for them early in this administration are our best agents for change. They've already helped bring about some promising developments, especially in the economic arena. So we have to work to unleash the potential that we see in our hemisphere. And it truly is an exciting opportunity for the United States, and equally for all the nations of the hemisphere. When President Obama and I went to that first of his summits 3 years ago, it was exciting because I remembered the first summit that we had in Miami. I'm old enough to remember a lot of those things these days. And I remember the the generational look of that summit, when frankly my husband was about the youngest leader, as I recall, or looked like it anyway. Whereas now, there are young leaders with new ideas who are working hard on behalf of their country. There are women elected presidents, something which, you know, I think is a great advance. And so the whole picture is one of great promise and opportunity and excitement. So I know that both the President and I are excited about going back to the summit. We're sure there'll be some surprises, as there always are at such large events. But more than that, there will be a palpable sense of the connections between and among us. And to me, that is worth everything, to build on those connections, to connect us in a way that really provides what we are all seeking, to help people live up to their God-given potential, to enshrine the values and habits of democracy, to lift people who have a generation or so before been mired in illiteracy and poverty into the middle class. It doesn't get any better than that. This is the time for the Americas, and we have to do more to reach out to convince our own fellow Americans of that opportunity. And we have to, those of us in government or in academia or business or NGOs, be partners in making these connections real. I'm looking forward to the work ahead, and I thank you so much for your interest in the abiding partnerships here in our hemisphere. Thank you very much.